All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Soldier Stories podcast. My name is Mark Ross, and with me this afternoon, I have with me Bernd Haber, Haber or Haber,
Haber. Mhm.
Haber. All right, thank you very much, Bernd. Um, I have you on with me this afternoon because I came across you on your on Matchmaker,
Mhm.
and you had an incredible story about your grandfather. And the diary that you had about your grandfather, you translated that into a book.
Mhm.
And the title of your book is called Fritz Haber, which is your grandfather's name, correct?
Mhm.
All
Fritz
right.
Haber. Correct. Mhm.
Fritz Haber. Right. So before we get into uh, your book, just tell me a little bit about you and what you do.
Yes. So my name is Bernd Haber. I'm born German. I was born in Berlin, and actually in East Berlin. So before the Berlin Wall came down, I grew up in former East Germany, now of course reunited Germany, until 1989. Went to school, college, and yeah, lived my life basically in East Germany. Uh, of course, in November '89, the Berlin Wall comes down. That changed completely my life, of course. And in 1992, I was hired by an American global IT company that offered me an opportunity in 1995 to go to Phoenix, Arizona,
Mm.
on an IT project. So I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't haven't even heard of Arizona, so I thought, "Okay, I'll check it out." And it's been almost 30 years after I came to Arizona. I still live in Arizona in Phoenix, as you may recognize the picture behind me, the photo.
Yes,
Love
yes.
it here. Of course, some people may debate. Right now, it's July. It's quite hot, but I love the heat, the dry heat, of course.
Mm.
So yeah, over the last almost 30 years, I've been living my life, worked in IT,
Mm.
also got involved in the local and global national music business. I have a company that deals with artists. I send them on tour in Europe and in the United States. So it's a mix of things. And then, of course, something that popped up in 2020 when I went back to Berlin to visit my dad. He handed me a diary, which I knew of, but it
Mm.
was hidden for many, many years. He
Right.
handed the diary to me and said, "Bernd, do you want this diary of my father or your grandfather?" And I
Hmm.
said, "Of course I want this, the original diary." So I took it back home to Phoenix, and I was thinking, what should I do with this? And then I decided to publish this as a book here in the United States.
Okay. Okay. So your book is called Fritz Haber, which is your grandfather's name.
Yeah.
Uh, Talk to me about the book because I know during our initial interview, you basically broke it down about what the book was about. But uh, talk about the book though, because it really intrigued me, Bernd, about that book.
So it's actually his diary, or some people may refer to it as a diary versus memoir. So it could be a mix of both, but it's basically a handwritten document, 100 pages, that he filled likely when he returned from his encampment and incarcerament as a POW, American POW, in a camp in France, in the city of Metz, in August 1946. I think that's when he sat down and wrote it down very nicely, beautiful piece of paper at home after he returned. So basically, it's a diary of his experience in the military, but also his experience, most of it, his experience as a prisoner of war in
Mm.
the camp, in various stations of a camp, but eventually he ended up in that camp in France. But he was also, and that goes back to the life of my grandfather, which then receiving the diary compelled me to dig much deeper into his life, not just because I wanted to know about my family's life.
Sure.
If you and when you dig into his life, I realized that he was born in 1910. So 1910, for anyone who knows a little bit about German history or last century history, Germany in 1910 there was still an empire. So Germany had an emperor. Okay. Then
Mm.
in
Mm.
1914 through 1918, those 4 years, World War One, as a lot of people know, in Germany or in Europe, which then expelled basically the emperor. It became somewhat a democracy in the 1920s, referred to as the Weimar Republic. And those were the years when my grandfather in his 20s started to realize what's going on in the world. He became an apprentice, became a blacksmith as a profession in the 1920s. And because of his two brothers, Kurt and Otto, he was already exposed to the communist movement. I'll come back to that, how much that actually shaped and formed his mind and living.
Okay.
And then, of course, so that's the 1920s. In the 1930s, as we all know, 1933, Hitler took reign in Germany as a chancellor. And we know very much about that. The next 12 years, what happened in Germany, World War II, 1940. So he lived through this, and this is where he eventually became also a soldier. After, for example, 1933, he was incarcerated in a concentration camp. I'll come back to that as well. Early versions of concentration camps. 1945. So then he served as a soldier, got captured by the Americans. 1945, he gets captured by the Americans in April, spends the next 16 months in the POW camp. That's what the book is mostly about. And then, of course, he comes home, and there's two Germanys at the time, West and East Germany. He comes back to his wife and six kids, and of course, decided to live his life on the East German side. And of course, my father was already born. He was the eldest son, and I was born a little later. So we grew up together, basically, as a family in East Germany, and final station of his whole life, from an empire to 1990 when Germany reunited. West and East Germany became one Germany. And then in 1998, he passed away. So he lived through, forgot the number, 6 or 7 stages of German history in the 20th century.
Jeez, that's amazing. Uh, was your grandfather drafted or did he volunteer to go?
No, so he was drafted. In the book, he writes very detailed about it. So I have to go back a little bit in history. In the late 1920s, his two brothers introduced him to the communist movement. So in the early 1930s, after Hitler took reign, they went to the streets, protested, distributed leaflets, and so on. And then he was incarcerated. So he was not, I said like this, a fan of fascism at all. He tried to also do something about or against it. Throughout the 1930s, he had various jobs. But at the late, I think 1937, 1938, the first draft came because German military needed men. And then later on during the war, of course, they needed even more men. Initially, they would come to you saying, oh, you're a communist. You're not worth fighting in our army. Okay,
Mm,
good for me.
okay.
But of course, he had other problems with that. But in 1941, eventually he was drafted after his employer 3 times said, no, this is the most important employee in my company. You cannot draft him. They came back twice, but the third time in 1941, he had no chance to say no.
Mm, mm, mm. You know, one of the questions that really had me thinking was what was his situation like when he was captured and made a prisoner of war? What was that like for your grandfather?
So he goes very detailed about it, and there's a little secret in the book. So he writes very detailed about it. There's a secret. I'll come back to it. So it's April 28th, April 29, 1945. So it's just a few days, or maybe a week or two, until Germany renders completely to the Allied forces. So he's in a small village near Munich. That's where he was stationed. So he served mostly his military time in a aircraft searchlight unit, those big searchlights, trying at night try to find those airplanes for others, of course, to shoot them down. So he was not a front soldier, luckily, of course, for him. So he describes the day as they were in this little village in the morning, and they sensed it's coming to an end by that. And so they would see on the other side of the hill, the little town that they were, the American tanks would roll in
Mm,
slowly. And
mm,
of course, they were prepared, white flag. And he said, I'm here. I will surrender, of course, will not fight, even though there were some orders not still to fight, but they said, no, we'll just ignore those orders. But he had not the courtesy, but the guts, so to say, because he knew the local farmers, and they had still food. He said, "Oh, give me some eggs. I'll make pancakes. I boil some eggs for everyone who's still around. So
Right.
he makes breakfast while the American tanks roll in from the other side, saying, "Hey, because we don't know when's the next time we get some food." So
Mm,
there's that one. And then, of course, they wait for the Americans to come and they get captured. And he said, will not disguise myself as a civilian. I leave my uniform on so they know I'm a soldier, of course, without a weapon. And so it went. And eventually they came, captured him, put him on a truck, and then drove him away. The little secret, and this is where I would, if someone is interested in like treasure hunting, he describes that he and his buddy, fellow soldier, they buried 80 bottles of schnapps right there at that little village. And his comment is, "We'll come back when it's more convenient for us." So I will not reveal the name of the town right now because I
right.
want you to find anyone who is interested to find out. Maybe those 80 bottles are still buried in those
Right.
woods.
Right. 80 bottles of schnapps.
Yes.
I wonder how much, I wonder how pure that alcohol is at this point. It's been sitting for over 80 years.
Nobody hasn't found it,
And
so that's still good. Yeah, I don't know if it's white
holy
vodka,
crap.
what kind of schnapps. I have no idea. He just 80 bottles of schnapps. So
Right.
let's go.
Wow. That is something else. And you also mentioned that when your brother was arrested, they used him as bait to get to his older brother.
Correct.
Talk about that.
So let's go back to 1933. And then publishing this book, of course, I had to not I had to, but I was able to use also other sources, my family sources. For example, the original diary of my great grandmother, his mother. I have that original as well. So I could double check certain times and her comments with respect to this incident. So 1933, his two elder brothers were journeymen. So they were, building houses, roofs across the southern part of Germany. So his elder brother was known as a communist. He had already escaped and was hiding in Dresden. And of course, the Nazis didn't know where he is. So they came to Fritz's working place, Gestapo basically, took him and put him in a prison in the little town of Zwickau. It's in Saxony, very small town. And it's actually a castle. And I have a paper, it says on top of the paper, concentration camp. So
Mm,
he was incarcerated. His mom didn't know for weeks where he is still alive. And then about a year later, they released him. Still had charged him with treason, but they didn't have enough evidence because they forced him on. I don't know exactly how the story went. They forced him to write a postcard to Dresden to this address, and they found his brother because of that. They followed that postcard and eventually captured his brother. That triggered his release. So his brother spent 2 years in prison because of that. And of course, later on, there was some little bit disagreements about how it exactly happened, but that's
mm,
how it got to his brother.
mm. And you mentioned that after he was released from the concentration camp, did how much longer did he serve after his release from the concentration camp?
He never went back to prison or jail after that. So, and I want to mention, so when I say concentration camp, they had the title concentration camp. So in 1933, 1934, the Nazis went basically after the Social Democrats or the communists, the members of those parties, and would put them into a camp, primarily a labor camp. So they would have, cheap labor. So they would have to do anything. So those concentration camps at that time were not the killing machines that
Oh,
we know of, later on, 1938, 1939,
right.
1940s. But after he was released, he was lucky. He was never uh, um, captured again by the police or anything. So he did not have to serve until, of course, he had to was drafted by the Wehrmacht.
Mm, okay. Okay. And you said that when he got out, he got reunited with his wife and the kids. Uh,
Yes.
did he talk about any struggles, you know, like residue trauma that he had after his tour duty?
Yeah, I had the privilege in 1990. So he was 90 years old to visit him and I asked for it, to sit down with him and interview him about my family. That was the intent, about primarily my father, because I wanted to learn more about my father, but the entire family. This is a big family, great stories. So I sat down with him in his small apartment in Zwickau for 3 hours. I have this as a recorded interview. And during the interview, talk about family, he all of a sudden shows me this diary for the first time. That's when I saw it for the first time. And he said, "Ben, do you want to read it?" I said, "Of course I want to read it." So I took it home, but I had to return it then. We talked a little bit about military time, and there's a few episodes that he describes during the interview, which are also on the book website if someone is interested to listen to his original voice telling these stories. And he never talked about like PTSD type of things. So that, the first few years, because he was not the front soldier. So I'm not sure if he really had to, deal with like PTSD or these kind of things. Of course, war's war.
Right.
But I'm not aware if he had trouble with that. Maybe I never asked him or I never asked my dad about it.
Mm.
But there's two very well moving stories that came out of the interview, and then in his diary he touches upon is when he is in Metz in France in the camp. One day, 1946, February, March or so, there's an American journalist visiting the camp and wants to write about it. So my grandfather talks to the journalist and asks him, well, if I could ask you for a favor, uh, do you mind taking this letter to a pastor of a church in a small town near Munich to find a way to send it to him? So just picture this for a moment. It's 1945, Europe is totally destroyed. So there's not much infrastructure. Sending a letter, big risk, but he said, do it anyway. So the journalist goes to Munich and he finds a way to get that letter sent to this pastor, Huber, that's his name.
Mm.
And Pastor Huber, who knows my grandfather, said, "Oh, I still have the address of his family in Zwickau." So he forwards that letter. And they eventually get the letter from him from the camp. So they know at that point he's still alive. He's in a camp, of course, but he's alive. So the family responds. And in that letter back to him to the camp, my father asked his father, Fritz, Dad, I'm 15 years old. I have to make a decision what I want to become in life. I think I have three choices. So he writes this down in the letter. My first choice is I can become a miner, like my brothers, my uncles, and others in our family, because Zwickau is very well known for black coal mining.
Okay.
How about mining? Second, my teacher in school tells me I'm really good at acting. We had the stage play in school play. He said, "Well, you could become an actor. You're really good." Okay, number two. Number three, my dad was then already working for a local news agency, writing little articles, getting the news. Someone was realizing he's really good with language. So someone said, "Hey, you should become a journalist." So he writes this in the letter to his dad in the camp, said, "Dad, I want you to make that decision." In his response to his family in the letter, my grandfather writes to my dad, "Minor? No way. Absolutely not. This is not not a good thing, but you're not a minor. Acting? Absolutely no way. No,
Shut it down, huh?
shut it down. No way. Journalist? Go for it. Looks like you have some talent, and if someone tells you that, and then actually puts my dad on a path for the rest of his life to be for a political career within the Communist Party, and he ended up later to be a Politburo member of the Communist Party in East Germany. So his dad's decision set him on that path. In 1990, just to close the circle, in 1990, when I visited my dad and he gave me the diary, I told my dad about the letters, or the one letter or the two letters, and my father remembered, oh yeah, I remember writing something or sending the letters, but I forgot what I wrote. So I told my dad the whole story, basically full circle, that his dad made that decision for him what he should become in life. And that was January 2020, and in April 2020, my dad passed away. So it was very emotional for him and for me to
Sure.
close one loop in his life.
Sure. 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 Wow. How has the book impacted your life, Bernd?
From many perspectives. So I'm again born German, but have been living now in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm, American, of course.
Yeah.
So it impacted me in a way of making a decision. Where do I want to publish the book? Of course, obviously, Germany makes sense. It's a German diary, it's a German story,
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's so many books about World War II, the Wehrmacht, and personal stories. I thought maybe it's one of thousands of books. Maybe there's someone wants to read it. But in the uh, many about German history, and we talk about World War II. A lot of people know about World War II, of course. They know the name of Hitler, maybe Goebbels. They know about D-Day. They know about the Holocaust, maybe Nuremberg tribunal trials if they, did some research. And maybe there's one or two other key events during World War II, UK, the bombing of London, maybe that's it. So many people do not know the German history, World War II history before and during the war from a very personal perspective. And this is what I had in my hands.
Mm.
So therefore, that already impacted me personally to try to publish it here. And last year in 2024, in March, I was able to find a publisher, which always, as we all know, when you publish a book, finding a publisher takes the longest time. Found one here in Arizona,
Mm.
published a book. And the feedback that I got so far from my American friends, like the members of my wife's book club and other people that I talk to, they always, acknowledge or appreciate the personal story told by my grandfather in such a clear manner. If you read it, when you read it, it's so clear. You can close your eyes. You're right there at the scene. It's like a movie scene or script,
Yeah.
basically. It's
Yeah.
so fantastic. So I didn't have to do more research to describe or explain things. It's all there. So yeah, that has changed my life as a German, having now been living in America for almost 30 years.
Mm. 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 That's amazing. Oh, I forgot to ask you. Uh,
Mhm.
you mentioned that your grandfather was involved in a shooting
Yes.
group or something.
Yeah.
Talk
So
talk about that. Yeah, talk about
one
that.
paragraph in the diary in the book, just very briefly, he mentions that. But in the recording that I have, the interview, goes into more details about it. So I don't know the exact year, but as a member of soldier, you get an order saying, you come with me. We need to execute someone. So of
Right.
course you could say no, but you can't. So there, and he talks about it in detail on the website when you listen to him. So it's 35 men, and they tell him kind of, and there's two different stories about who they had to execute or executed. One was that one of the laborer, a French person, stole a loaf of bread. It's war, so there's a decision to be made. We can debate that. So, or the other story was there was a German soldier who tried to desert. So, of course, there's some rules in war. Doesn't matter who it was. So, 35 men are ordered to line up, get their guns, and then phenomenal aspect when he talks about it during the interview is that half of the 35 men they get the real bullets, the sharp bullets in a magazine. And the other half of that unit, the shooting squad unit, gets blanks. But they don't know who gets the blank and who has the real sharp bullet. So they get a bullet in it, and then off they go. And then, of course, follow the order, had to shoot. So, which was astounding to me in any military context.
Yes.
Of course, in the context of the situation, that they gave those soldiers, those 35 men, including my grandfather, a
Mm.
peace of mind to say, well, you killed someone, you may not have killed one because you had a blank. And in the book, he says that was the only person I've ever killed during the war, ever. So it's just astounding for me, this story, how he talks about it,
Mm.
that they gave him a peace of mind.
So no one knows who has the real bullet,
Correct. Mhm.
but everybody thinks that they have the real bullet.
Well, they have I'm not sure if they told him saying, so there's sharp and blank bullets. They said, come here, here's a bullet, go.
Right.
They probably didn't, but he knew because he talks about it in the interview. He tells me about it, saying, "Well, half of them we got blanks." So, but I don't know if I got one or I got the real one.
How can people get this book, Bernd?
So there's multiple opportunity ways of. One is there's a website. If I may hold up the sign, that's
Sure.
okay. So it's 16 months spow.com, and there's a link to Amazon. Or you could maybe if it's okay, I'll hold it up so people can see the title. So it's on Amazon. You can order it there or reach out to me through the website. I'm happy to send it directly to you anywhere in the world.
Sure.
I'll sign it for you because it's the first edition. Do a little something. And so there's multiple ways to get a hold of the book. Yes.
Nice, nice. Well, and how can people contact you if they want to get more information about the book or about yourself?
It would be the same, the website. So there's a link so you can send me emails and I will definitely respond to anyone who questions, of course.
Okay. So 16 months as POW.com.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Bernd, it has been a pleasure taking the time to speak with you about your book and learning more about your grandfather. Uh, I'm sure it would have been a great pleasure for me to meet your grandfather, man, and listen to that story because I'm telling you, uh, the way that you illustrated the book to me in our initial interview, it just I was actually visualizing it,
Mm.
you know. So I was actually, able to see how he was maneuvering around life, and yeah, yeah. And I told you already, I said that could be movie material.
Yes.
That
And anyone
that
who's listening to it, thanks, Mark, for mentioning it. So that's, of course, I would love to, well, anyone who publishes a book, a novel, or something like this, has the dream of turning this into a movie. My pitch to anyone who is listening and who would be interested, please reach out to me, of course, is whoever plays my grandfather in a leading role will win the Oscars. So,
mm, well, hey, if that comes to being, I would definitely go check that movie out. I would definitely take a look at it.
thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Bernd Haber, it has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I know you have some things to do, so go take care of your business, sir.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciated having me on your show, especially also um, from a soldier perspective. And if I may just mention one more little thing,
Sure,
um,
sure.
I've been invited in here in Arizona in October to present the book at a veterans group, so Vietnam veterans group here in Arizona. For
Yes.
me, it's an honor to speak about my grandfather's experience with the group and also have an exchange. War experience. You can argue war is war, but there's certain different experiences. And perhaps I also have the opportunity to talk to someone who may have been in a POW camp for a period of time. So I really look forward to speaking to those veterans in October.
I think the veterans will be looking forward to listening to you because your grandfather's story is an amazing story.
Thank you.
It truly is. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Soldier Stories. Bernd, you have yourself a good rest of your day. Ladies and gentlemen, that's listening to this, you guys also have a good rest of your day as well. And stay tuned for another episode coming up next week. Take care of yourselves, and you take care too.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Bye bye now.